Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak.
Today, I tell you all about the very mysterious death of Assistant United States Attorney Jonathan Luna.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity, the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. For more information, go to thedarkoak.com, our Instagram page, The Dark Oak Podcast, or stay to the end of this episode and we will give you all the details. And don't forget, you can always head to our Instagram page too, where we have what we call episode extras. So these are videos, pictures, audio files, anything that we think may help to solve this case and give you a better idea of what suspects look like, what victims look like, what crime scenes look like. So make sure you head there. It's very easy to find. You can go into our highlight section, click right on episode extras. There'll be a cover, and then behind that, all those photos that you want to see to get you a front row seat to all these episodes. So stay part of the conversation. Okay, speaking of weird cases, I definitely want to talk about Jonathan Luna, but I also want to add that I've recently watched the Netflix documentary about Aaron Hernandez. Have you seen that yet?
I have not.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it would be one that I was interested in. Pro football is generally not my jam, but I happen to have the house to myself for a day and tried to find a limited series that I might get into. And it is incredibly interesting. And as it pertains to this podcast, there's a lot of discussion about whether Aaron Hernandez would have committed the crimes that he had if he had not played football and been subjected to CTE. And CTE, of course, is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Encephalopathy. There we go. Got it. And what this means is your brain matter begins to deteriorate after repeated blows, repeated trauma, like football players would experience. And so the long and short of the story is Aaron Hernandez was very young, played football almost his entire life, had kind of a domineering father that pushed him into football. He and his brother, he went to go play for the University of Florida, which was a very serious football team in college. He only played there for a year and then went to go play for the New England Patriots. And so he was playing pro football at 22 years old. And during that time, he started associating with not the best people. And there were some murders. There were 3 in total. He was found guilty of 1. Could have been guilty of the other 2, even though that wasn't official. But he wound up committing suicide in his jail cell. They studied his brain and realized he did have CTE. So it's not enough necessarily to put on our podcast to do a full episode about it, because I don't know that we know enough about CTE to say whether it's directly responsible, because many critics have said lots of people suffer from traumatic brain injuries, and even specifically football players, but not everyone goes out and murders someone or commits suicide. You know, Junior Seau was another one, very famous football player with CTE, and he committed suicide, but he shot himself in the chest so that his brain could be studied. That's how much he felt like his brain had been damaged by repeated concussions. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I don't know that it will ever be fully, well, okay, this is just my opinion.
Okay.
I will put it out there. I don't know that it will ever be fully explored, because football in the United States is such a big moneymaker, and it's meant to be violent. It's meant to be a violent sport. People get off on that. Big hits, big muscular dudes running down the field. That's kind of what it's meant to be. I mean, this is kind of our Roman gladiators, right? Like our
Right.
equivalent of the Roman gladiators. And these athletes are really praised and they're moneymakers.
Sure. Well, I do think, though we may never know for sure, I don't know that we can ever answer that question, whether CTE is responsible for these types of behaviors. But I definitely think it could be a risk factor, like a contributing factor. It's kind of like people who suffer abuse, say as children, maybe say sexual abuse. I believe statistics show that abusers, so people who abuse others, have generally been victims of abuse. However, that is not to say that all victims of abuse will go on to be abusers. So it is a risk factor of sorts, but you're not necessarily guaranteed to follow that path just because you're a victim of abuse or repeated head trauma.
Well, and as a society, can we say, well, because you have CTE, you're allowed to go and just kill people? No.
Of course not.
I mean, we can't say that.
But could it be a defense, like insanity or something like that? Possibly.
Right. And in Aaron Hernandez's case, there were many other contributing factors. He had a very strained relationship with his family. There were, pretty compelling evidence that he was a closeted homosexual. So he was having some identity issues and things like that. So that added to it. But I have to say, one of the quotes from the documentary, it said, did he commit crimes because he had CTE? I don't know. But if Aaron Hernandez had gone on to be a concert pianist, would he have killed people? Probably not. So it's interesting to note because he was exposed to this relatively violent sport. And don't come at me. Listen, everyone in my family is huge football fans. I personally, though, don't allow my boys to play, which they are very upset about. I'm never winning any Cool Mom awards because my kids are not allowed to play tackle football. And who knows, when they get to be teenagers, they're going to have to make their own decisions about what they decide to do. But while they're young, and I mean 10 and under, I'm protecting their little brains. That's just how I feel about it. I know others make different choices for their families. That's just what I'm doing for my family. But it was interesting. It was a really interesting documentary to think about the choices that we make and what we expose our bodies to. They do change some of our chemistry, our body makeup, and could potentially affect decision making.
That is interesting. I'm going to have to give that documentary a try and see what I think. Well, I mean, we just celebrated the Super Bowl a couple of weeks ago, and think about it. I don't even like football, and I'm having a party with an unofficial party. It was just me and my 5-year-old and my 8-year-old, but it was a party for the Super Bowl.
It's part of our culture.
Right.
It is. And it's a huge moneymaker, especially in these college towns. So I don't ever see it being fully explored. Now, of course, everyone has responded by increasing safety of the equipment. And, now there are additional penalties. You can't lead with your head and these kinds of things, which are supposed to mitigate those injuries. But it's the nature of the sport. Right. You can't have one without the other.
I'm with you. That's very interesting. Good questions being raised.
I agree. And the more we know, right? I don't think these coaches plan on their players having head injuries and concussions and things that diminish their abilities later in life. But at the same time, I think it's a very short-term outlook on that person's life.
Yeah, I can see that. I can absolutely see that. That makes a lot of sense.
So anyway, if you guys want to hit it up, it is interesting. It's worth a little watch. The CTE part really is only brought up at the very, very end. It's a 3-part little limited series, but it's interesting to see, again, the different factors. Like, I think there was probably 3 or 4 things going on all at the same time that led to what happened. But even when he joined the New England Patriots, they do this screening and he scored extremely low in maturity.
Oh, wow.
So in my opinion, the CTE was already showing because, CTE create lack of inhibition, lack of reasoning skills, which on the outside would display as just being immature,
Mm-hmm.
but really you have decreased cognitive abilities.
Right. That's really interesting. And it actually raises some questions that we might be asking in today's episode about Jonathan Luna.
Oh, okay.
Because not exactly, but what you just said just made me think, there's a bit of a parallel. Contributing factors, different things going on. Maybe an outcome isn't the result of any just one thing. There may be several things going on that lead to an outcome. And there may be some of that in today's case.
Okay. Okay.
Shall I get into it?
Yeah, the only other comment I have, did you ever get into that movie Sliding Doors?
Love that movie.
Okay. Every time I think about where life takes you, and again, these contributing factors and how one thing leads to another thing, it makes me think of that movie, which I think actually gets ragged on quite a bit
The movie?
because, yeah, I think so. I don't think it went over very well, but for me, I don't know, maybe it just hit me at the right point of my life. I just thought it was so compelling. So the idea, it's Gwyneth Paltrow,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's Gwyneth Paltrow. And the idea is she's trying to catch this metro, like the subway. And it plays out two scenarios, one where she was able to catch the train and the other where she wasn't. And it's all these subsequent events about how her life could have ended up in either of these situations. And that always just kind of stuck with me.
Just with one thing going differently.
Yeah, just one thing.
One choice. You're 5 minutes later to get on a train. What happens? And it changes the whole outcome of your life.
Yeah.
Similar to like the butterfly effect.
Yeah, how these small actions can change the whole course of your life.
And it's really interesting to think about. I think about that in my own life because there was a time when my best friend from high school said, "Hey, Cynthia, I'm going to this interview. It's to be a flight attendant for United Airlines." And I thought about going, but I think I had something else in my life going on that seemed more exciting at the time. I don't know what it was. So it tells you how important it was. But I did not go. She ended up getting a job as an airline attendant and spent her 20s traveling the world and ended up, living in all these various places. And I ended up not doing that and getting married and having a baby in my 20s. And I think sometimes what would my life have looked like had I gone that route? Honestly, one of my friend's flight plans was routes that she would often take was the route that was taken on September 11th.
Mm.
Could I have ended up being a flight attendant who somehow was on that plane? Like, what would my life have looked like if I'd gone a different route? And it's interesting because we both look at each other. She was traveling and she was later to settle down. And here I settled down earlier. And now in my 40s, I'm doing the traveling. It's just kind of interesting because we both ended up in the same place, but we took two very different routes to get there. And I find it so interesting.
Yeah. And each one of those pieces makes you who you are today. It gives you the knowledge that you have today. It gives you the experience that you have today. Yeah.
It's very cool. Very cool to think about.
Yeah.
So the fact, that we're talking about maybe an outcome isn't a result of just any one thing. Maybe there are several contributing factors that help create an outcome. And I think we might see some of that in at least one of the theories that we're going to talk about today here in this case of Jonathan Luna. On December 4th, 2003, at around 5 a.m., a man named Daniel arrived at his job at a well drilling company in Denver, Pennsylvania. Daniel parked his truck at the side of the building near the woods before punching in at the time clock, making his coffee, and heading back outside to fill several trucks that his company would be using for the day with gasoline. When he got outside, he noticed a small red light glowing near the woods. Now, by this time, a coworker had arrived, so the two walked over together to check things out, and they learned that the light was on the dashboard of a 4-door silver Honda Accord. This car's engine was still running and the headlights were on, and the vehicle's front wheels teetered at the edge of a 4-foot-high embankment that led down to a creek. Other than the unusual placement, there was no indication that the car had been involved in a crash, And this was the last thing Daniel expected to stumble upon this morning, obviously, as this area is somewhat remote and located along a twisty road, so they didn't get a whole lot of traffic out here. So he kept looking around until he noticed a small amount of blood on the front seat of the car and blood smears on the driver's door and front fender.
Well, that's not what you want to see.
Not good. So obviously someone had to have put this car in this spot, and given the blood, they may be injured, but there was no driver anywhere in sight. So within 15 minutes, state troopers arrived at the scene. While processing the vehicle, they found about $200 in cash scattered about the inside of the vehicle and a large pool of blood in the back floorboard of the car. And this was made especially eerie given the fact that there was also a child's car seat in the back.
Oh, shoot. I don't like it.
I'll give you a spoiler alert. Nothing bad happened to the child, but just the visual of the car seat and then the blood, it's just icky.
I was into The Walking Dead when it first came out, and they didn't have a lot of like baby zombies or anything, but every now and then there would be like a nod to that to just remember like it affected all of humanity.
Yeah.
This virus, and there would be like car seats with blood on them, and I just hated it. I hated all those scenes. I don't like thinking about that.
It shouldn't go together. It's two things that shouldn't go together.
Absolutely.
And that's why I mentioned it, because I was like, that's just eerie.
It's
just
is.
Eerie. Now, after finding the vehicle, finding the blood, troopers found the body of a man laying face down in this creek.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was wearing a business suit and an overcoat, and it appeared he'd been stabbed numerous times, mostly in the neck and shoulders. This man would turn out to be 38-year-old Assistant United States Attorney Jonathan Luna, who at almost this exact moment was being reported missing.
Oh, not somebody you expect to be found in a rural area face down in a creek with stab wounds.
It's not, especially since he lived in Baltimore and he's being found in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Jonathan P. Luna was born on October 21st, 1965. He was half Filipino and half African American. He spent his childhood in the projects of the South Bronx, very near Yankee Stadium, and so it isn't hard to believe that he became a lifelong Yankees fan. After high school, Jonathan received his undergraduate degree from Fordham University, and he later studied at the University of North Carolina School of Law. He worked at Arnold and Porter in Washington, D.C. from 1993 to 1994, and the Federal Trade Commission from 94 to 97. Jonathan served as a prosecutor in the Brooklyn borough of New York City before moving to Baltimore to become an assistant United States attorney. Now, because he'd grown up in the projects, he had seen personally over and over communities of people who were struggling, people who didn't always get treated fairly or with compassion. So when he went to law school, his friends and family assumed he would probably find a career doing something like civil rights law, or maybe even become a defense attorney, something like that, where he was helping traditionally marginalized communities.
Coming from his own experiences. Yeah.
Right.
Drawing from that.
Right. Now, Jonathan was known as just a good guy. He was just a good guy. He was very likable. In fact, Jonathan's roommate in law school, Reggie Shuford, said in the Somebody Somewhere podcast that I used as one of my sources for this episode, that Jonathan actually took a year off of law school to go home and take care of his father, who'd been recently diagnosed with cancer. So he always put his family first. And speaking of family, John married a beautiful obstetrician named Angela Hopkins on August 29th, 1993, and together they had 2 children. Now, Reggie also shared how Jonathan was before his time. He tells how in 1995, before he and Jonathan even met, Reggie was serving as in-house counsel to the Atlanta Braves and was resistant to the idea of a name change. But Jonathan was advocating for the name change, writing a letter to the Baltimore Sun criticizing the racism inherent in MLB Indian mascots. And I think Reggie's correct when he says how ahead of time Jonathan was as these are debates we are still having today, 30 years later.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
he was talking about it 30 years ago, before you were hearing about this kind of thing in mainstream,
Wow.
in the mainstream.
Yeah.
So why was this likable, intelligent family man found laying face down in a creek in the woods? Let's start by going over the hours before his death. On the morning of Wednesday, December 3rd, which was day 3 of a trial that was expected to last 4 days, Jonathan was fined $25 for being late to court. He told the judge that the reason for his being late was because he'd been at the hospital all night with his sick 1-year-old, which is a pretty good excuse. And I have been there, and man, it makes that next day really hard.
Yeah, for sure.
The court reporter working that day, Ned Richardson, remembers Jonathan having a really rough day. He would say that Jonathan seemed very distracted. He would start going in one direction, but then jump onto another topic. And in this trial, Jonathan was prosecuting 2 men who used their record label, Stash House Records, as a front for heroin trafficking.
Oh boy, that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. So I will tell you, Jonathan worked on big cases. This is Baltimore, and he's a prosecutor. So he prosecuted scary people, dangerous people. There conceivably could be a lot of people who might want him dead.
Like organized crime type stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So going into this, let's just put that out there.
Yeah, these aren't just one-time kind of petty criminals. These are like the big dogs.
Scary, scary people. But in this case, he was prosecuting these 2 men using their record labels up front. And the prosecution's main witness in this case was an informant for the FBI named Warren Grace. Now, Warren Grace was one of these bad guys. He too was a drug dealer, and an extremely dangerous one. He was so dangerous that it would later be said that the agent put in charge of his supervised release was in constant danger, just being around him.
Yikes.
Now, Warren, while under the court's and the FBI's supervision, was violating the terms of his release by slipping his electronic bracelet off and going out into the streets and wreaking havoc.
I'm pretty sure that's not allowed in the rule book.
It is not allowed. However, the FBI and the prosecutors knew he was doing this. But because they didn't want it to hurt their case, they turned a blind eye while also failing to disclose Warren's antics to the defense.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I guess there is means to an end, but this seems like a pretty sticky situation here.
It's a little shady, and it gets worse. So how they were using Warren is, in an effort to put these 2 defendants away, the FBI had used him to buy drugs from the defendants using marked money. However, on one of these sting operations, prior to Warren purchasing the drugs from the defendants, the FBI found a plastic package in his vehicle with capsules of heroin in it. And what's interesting about this is that in all 3 of the prior purchases that Warren had allegedly made from these defendants, the drugs were packaged the exact same way. It became clear that Warren had planned to keep the cash that the FBI had given him to make the purchase and bring back the drugs he already had, and then tell the FBI he'd purchased it from the defendants.
I mean, I feel like this is some of those situations where, like, if the bad guys had just decided to be good guys, they could have put their ingenuity to, like, good use.
This is not a dumb plan.
No.
This is a smart plan.
That's what I'm saying. If you just weren't a bad guy, I would give you props.
Right. But you can see how this is terrible. I mean, first of all, who's to say he even bought any of the drugs from the defendants? Like, this is
about to just blow up.
It is. This is something that absolutely should have been reported to the defense, because anything that the prosecution finds out that could help the defense's case, they're supposed to turn over. And if they don't, they could be looking at a Brady violation.
Right.
But they also know that if the defense learns about this, they will not only lose the case, but they're going to look really bad. Really bad. I mean, this is the U.S. attorney's primary witness, and the prosecution has been complicit in the FBI's desire to keep Warren Grace out of jail in an effort to make their case stronger. Worse than that, the prosecution had asked a judge to comply with this whole scenario. There was a memo written to Judge Smolkin by Jonathan's colleague, Jackie Rodriguez-Coss. This memo was in the pretrial services file, and it pretty much said, please don't revoke Warren's bail. Please don't revoke his conditions of release because it will hurt this other case that we're involved in.
Oh, so they didn't reveal that Warren was crooked and was essentially like a double agent, but they said, don't put him in jail because we need him for this other case.
So I haven't seen the exact memo. The authorities are keeping the details, like the reports, surveillance videos, all the things that we would want to see in a case like this. They've kept them very close to the vest. But pretty much what this memo says is we know he's doing bad things. We know he's doing stuff he shouldn't be doing, stuff that should land him back in jail. Please don't revoke.
Okay.
Please don't revoke his privileges because we need him.
And probably these files are closed because of the high profile personalities that would be implicated.
That could be a very good reason for it. Jonathan did not disclose this memo to the defense attorney. Now, we don't really know for sure if he even knew about the memo because he didn't write it. So we're assuming he knew about it. If he did not know about it, then he wasn't very prepared for his case. He absolutely should have known about it.
Right.
If he did know about this memo, then he would have known he was about to be publicly exposed in the middle of a courtroom because the judge in the drug case ruled that Jonathan would have to turn over all of the documents in the pretrial services files, including the memo to the Judge Smolkin by the end of the day.
So clearly their request to be shady is not going to work out.
They're going to be exposed.
Okay.
They are going to be exposed. So what Jonathan really needed at this point to save face was to negotiate a plea deal and end this whole thing
quickly.
Very quickly. And by 6 p.m. that evening, he had reached a plea agreement on this case. And this plea agreement was really good for the defense, because prosecution's in a bind. So they ended up dropping a potential murder charge for one of these men because allegedly there was a drug deal gone wrong and one of these men killed somebody in this drug deal. They dropped that.
I hate all of this. I hate that good guys are kind of being shady. I hate that bad guys are now going to get away with stuff. I don't like any of this.
And I have to believe that probably the FBI and the prosecution thought they were doing it for the greater good. I mean, they really wanted to get these guys who were obviously bad guys, obviously dangerous guys.
It's a thin line. It's a thin line that you have to walk.
Right. You still have to do it on the up and up. And this doesn't feel very up and up. It feels pretty shady. And as a result, now these two defendants got less time than they would have gotten under any other circumstance. They really made out. And that's important to know because they don't have any motive to want Jonathan dead.
Okay, sure.
Jonathan is bringing them this plea deal that is great for them. After reaching this agreement at around 6:30 p.m., Jonathan went home to have dinner with his family, but returned to the office at 8:48 p.m. to draw up the plea agreements. At 9:06, he spoke to one of the defense attorneys on the case and told him that he had to go back home for a bit, but would come back to the courthouse to finish up later that night.
Later that night?
Girl, when I was reading this, I was like so exhausted. And here's the thing. I used to work at a law firm. And I literally pulled all-nighters when I was there. So I was, as I was reading this, I was suffering from a little bit of PTSD, I think. And also like super exhausted for Jonathan. But I had these evenings when I worked at a law firm and I don't miss them. We know that Jonathan did complete one of the plea agreements, the more simple one, but the more complicated one was left unfinished. At 9:30 p.m., Jonathan left a voicemail for the other defense attorney saying he would fax over the agreements by midnight when he finished them.
It sounds like me writing some of my scripts sometimes.
Well, that's the other thing I didn't want to say it is in some ways I can still relate. When you're a mom raising kids, sometimes the only time you have to research and write scripts is after the kids go to bed.
Yeah. Sometimes I write Cynthia and I'm like, I'm going to send this edited episode over to you very late tonight. If you don't want to get it, put your phone on vibrate.
I think the latest I've ever gotten one of those is what? After 2 a.m.?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably one of them. I was like, hope you like it.
If you don't, too bad. Yeah, so all that to say I feel his pain, but this was pretty bad. Now, those midnight faxes never arrived, and Jonathan was reportedly back at his home around 11 when he got a phone call and told his wife, Angela, he had to go back to the courthouse. Now, this is strange because I've seen it reported two different ways. I've seen it reported that he came back after dinner and just stayed. But I also saw something where Angela said, no, he was home at 11, got a phone call and had to go back, which I guess is possible. But either way, he's spending a lot of time at the courthouse that night working on these plea agreements.
So what about the last plea agreement? It was done at midnight, but it was never sent?
No. So one of the plea agreements was completed. One of them was not.
Oh, he was going to complete it by midnight, but it was never completed.
He had been, yes.
So not just that it didn't get faxed, like it literally wasn't even done.
It never got completed.
Okay, got it. So he did the one. We know he intended to do the second one, but then something stopped him from doing it.
He did not do it.
Okay.
At 11:38 p.m., Jonathan's car was seen leaving the parking garage for the last time. It would later be discovered that when he left his office, he left his laptop, his cell phone, and his eyeglasses behind. And he absolutely needed those eyeglasses for driving, and it has never been reported that he had a second pair. Now, maybe he did, but it's never been reported there was a second pair, and the fact that his eyeglasses were left behind has come up quite a lot as a problem. And this leads some to ask, was he alone or was somebody else driving?
Right. Did somebody escort him out, if you will?
Perhaps. Again, authorities have kept all of this very close to the vest. So we're just doing the best we can, piecing things together. But a lot of the surveillance video, the autopsy report, just a lot of evidence has not been released. Now, what would happen over the next 4 hours makes this already convoluted case even harder to understand. Instead of heading home, Jonathan starts driving in the opposite direction of his house. He would continue driving through Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, where his body would ultimately be found. Authorities were able to follow his route by piecing together his Easy Pass entries, as well as a toll ticket that he would end up purchasing. Now, we know at 12:57 a.m., he stopped at a gas station near Newark, and his card was used for a $200 ATM withdrawal at a travel plaza. It's believed that if any point during the next several hours Jonathan met up with anyone, this could have been a time where he did so. At 2:37 a.m., his car enters the New Jersey Turnpike, and 10 minutes later at 2:47, the vehicle is in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, where the car entered the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It's interesting that the route that he's taking is not a direct route to where he ended up. So it's almost like he made it to his destination and then had started on his way back towards home. But we don't know where that destination was.
Yeah, this is very strange.
At 3:20 a.m. at King of Prussia, his debit card is used at a Sunoco station to buy gas. But he didn't just buy one tank of gas. He bought 2 tanks of gas. And he also bought at least 2 sodas. And I don't know that this actually really means anything, but there is something to me about buying more than one soda at a time that makes me think there's more than one person. I don't think I'd feel that way if it was bottles of water, because you can drink water room temp. I can see myself buying a couple bottles of water for the road, but I want my soda cold. So I would never buy more than one soda unless I had a way to keep the second one cold. I don't know. That for me, I was just like, you're buying more than one soda?
The soda doesn't turn me off as much as the 2 tanks of gas, because where are you putting the gas?
That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, here's what we know about the 2 tanks of gas. They may not have both been for him. We don't know. I don't know if they went in a gas can. I don't know if they went in another vehicle. We just know he purchased 2 tanks of gas.
Now, like carfuls of gas?
Yes.
Or, okay, well, they couldn't have gone into cans unless you have lots of cans. Because an average tank of gas is what, anywhere between like 15 and 30 gallons? You have to have a lot of containers to put that much fuel in. So I
Okay.
can't imagine them going into containers. It must have gone into a vehicle.
Which makes more sense.
Or was there some kind of like fraud going on at the gas station, something like that? Because I've seen some shady stuff where they steal your card and, you know, they run it twice or whatever.
Now, you just brought up a good point. Is there some kind of fraud? This happened at King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Remember that.
Okay.
Okay. The security footage for this gas station was reviewed, and there was another man at the station who could have potentially been traveling with Jonathan, but it wasn't clear.
Okay. I mean, if he paid for his gas, I would think he was, but weird.
I have had people come up to me at a gas station and say, hey, I'm trying to get here. My debit card's not working, or I got robbed, or whatever. Can you help me out? I think it's possible he was doing a good deed.
Oh, I see. They think it may be even unrelated to what's happening.
We really don't know. We don't know. The public
Okay.
doesn't know.
Like,
Now,
it could have been just a benevolent act of him purchasing another tank of gas.
potentially, we really don't know. Now, authorities may know more that they're not telling us, but the public doesn't know. So coming with what I do know, I can see somebody doing something kind and saying, yeah, let me just get you gas. You know, we don't know why he left the office and didn't go home and traveled through several states.
And he doesn't have his glasses.
Doesn't have his glasses. So that seems like an unusual place to be, and then be like, but let me do something kind for you. Like, it feels like you might have something more pressing going on.
Right. But then again, we do know he did have this compassion, at least when he was growing up, for disenfranchised communities. So maybe he did that more than the average person. Who knows?
It could literally just be a red herring. But it's interesting.
It's definitely the 2 tanks of gas for me is interesting, but the 2 Cokes is and we don't know if he again left under duress. Is someone with him in that vehicle? But then again, if you're with someone and they're forcing you to leave and drive to a destination you've never been before, again, are you gonna like talk to somebody that needs a tank of gas? I don't know. That's strange.
It's weird. I guess if he wasn't a coffee drinker, just going back to the sodas, I'm just trying to be really open-minded. If he wasn't a coffee drinker, I don't know, would you chug 2 sodas just to get energy? It was the middle of the night. Would you do that to keep awake? I wouldn't, but would somebody else?
Well, here's the deal. Sometimes I've done it because it's like BOGO.
Okay, that makes sense.
They're like BOGO special. It's like, you know, buy one, get one, or it's a special deal if you buy 2. Like, literally, I've gone up to the register before with just my 1 bottle of soda, and they're like, well, listen, it's only 50 cents more to get 2. And so then I'll just go get another one. So then I have 2 sodas.
Okay.
So I don't know. I guess I'm saying I can explain that away more than I can the gas.
Okay. I can see that. I think even though I don't like warm soda, if I could get 2 for the price of 1, I'd probably take the 2. But I wouldn't drink it warm, I'll tell you that. I'm not a crazy person.
Cynthia has standards.
That's right. Now, later, a Roy Rogers restaurant manager would say that she saw Jonathan at 3:30 a.m., and she was sure it was him. But the FBI has questioned the validity of this sighting because they don't think he could have been in the area where this restaurant was, given the other times and locations where we know he was. At 4:04 a.m., Jonathan's car exited Pennsylvania Turnpike at exit 286. And this is weird. At this point, to pay the toll, Jonathan turned in a paper ticket, despite having an easy pass. So if you don't travel on toll roads often, here's how it works. You have to either have an easy pass, which does work on these roads. You just put it in your car and it just keeps track of every toll you go through and it just automatically bills. Or you have to pick up a ticket when you get on the toll road, and then you turn it in when you get off, and that's how they're able to calculate how much you owe. But again, with an Easy Pass, that's all done electronically. So why did he switch over to paper when he had the Easy Pass in his car? And I will also say, because there was a period in my life when I was traveling a lot on these toll roads, And I don't remember the details, but I remember not wanting to use the Easy Pass. And I did research because I didn't want to pay with the ticket and also have the Easy Pass billed. And from the research I found, if you go through with an Easy Pass, it's getting billed, regardless of whether or not you pay with the ticket. So he may have even been double billed.
Which makes me wonder, was the person driving the car unaware that the car had an Easy Pass?
Okay, so a lot of people ask that. They say this is more evidence that Jonathan wasn't driving
I would agree.
the car.
I think you would be double billed because there's no way to remove the Easy Pass because it communicates electronically.
Right.
So unless it literally goes back in one of those like magnetic sleeves or whatever, it's going to communicate. So yeah, I mean, you would be double paying, and that doesn't make any sense unless possibly he thought, I don't know that he would have this thought, but again, just thinking out loud, what if he wasn't sure if the Easy Pass worked in other states?
Okay. True. So good point.
Because I wouldn't know, because I have an Easy Pass here in Florida, but does that work in Pennsylvania?
Okay.
So maybe I would think maybe there's not a crossover, so maybe I need to pay. Or again, if there was somebody else in the car that was driving, they didn't realize the car had an Easy Pass.
All right. That's a very valid point, Stephanie. And honestly, one I haven't heard brought up. The fact that maybe he didn't know if it crossed over state to state.
I wouldn't know. I would get nervous.
No, it did. It did.
Yeah.
But you're right. Maybe he didn't know that. Here's something that I thought was weird. Now, on the toll roads that I've been on, if you're using an Easy Pass, you stay to the left and you just go. So conceivably, you could not have an Easy Pass and you could go through without paying anything. They're going to take a picture of your license plate and you're going to get billed, and you'll probably end up paying an extra fee. So it's going to cost you more in the long run. And again, in the toll roads that I used to travel on, if you're using the ticket, then you actually stop and talk to an actual person in a booth and pay. We know Jonathan ends up dead. So if there is somebody with him, to me, stands to reason this may not be a good person. Why is a good person even worried about paying the toll?
Well, this is what I was thinking. Maybe he doesn't want to have the electronic footprint, if you will.
Okay. Another theory is that, yes, he didn't want to be tracked.
Maybe whoever this was didn't realize that the E-Pass is still going to recognize the car. And so he was thinking he doesn't want to be tracked. I mean, that would really be the only thing that's popping up in my head right now.
I just think it's interesting knowing what I know more than you do, but knowing what I know about this case, I just think if I'm going to go dump somebody in a creek, am I really worried about paying the toll? I'm probably just going to blow through, because to stop and pay the toll means more chance of being caught on surveillance, more chance of being seen by a witness. And the only thing I could think about that is maybe they were afraid if they blew through all the tolls, maybe there would be like a higher chance of getting pulled over. But I don't think it works that way. It's not like an alert goes out immediately that this person's blowing tolls. Is there?
It's happened to people I know.
Oh, yes. Really?
Yeah, because if you go through it, there is a light that flashes that lets you know you can absolutely get pulled over. It's rare, but it absolutely can happen. And they pull you over and you get a fine, and it's like the whole 9 yards. So it's possible. I don't know. None of this really makes sense, though. I mean, all of them are possible, but they all seem very strange.
It is strange. It is very, very strange. Now, authorities were able to track down Jonathan's actual paper ticket. And when they did, they found it had a spot of Jonathan's blood on it.
Oh.
An hour and a half after Jonathan turned in this ticket.
Jonathan or someone with Jonathan.
Okay, good catch. Good catch. Yes. An hour and a half after this ticket was turned in, Jonathan's car and body were found in the creek.
So he might have already been deceased.
Right. And though we know a lot of where he went, there was still a lot of time that was unaccounted for. So, for instance, there were times where maybe it should have only taken him 15 minutes to get from point A, where we know he was, to point B, where we know he was, but it maybe would take an hour for the vehicle to get there. So there is a lot of missing time that we don't know where he was, what he was doing. Now, this is very interesting. Remember, I told you to remember that gas was purchased in King of Prussia. Sometime after 9:30 a.m., Jonathan's credit card was used in King of Prussia, but his body had already been found. So who's using his card? So maybe you're right. Maybe it was fraud. Maybe he lost his card. Maybe he dropped his card. Maybe he lost it in an altercation.
Yeah,
And
that sounds more on par because, they'll go and make these purchases and they'll just keep doing it until the card gets shut off.
right. So maybe that's what happened. I even thought, okay, I wonder if because it was in the middle of the night, he used his card and it didn't go through right away. There've been maybe a couple times where somebody's credit card machine was down or something, so they took my information and then they just ran it later when their machine was back up. So it shows that I made a charge later than I actually made it. But I do think the fraud, the idea that it was fraudulently used, probably makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Now, Jonathan's body was autopsied, but again, that report has never been released to the public. But here's what we have been told are the findings. Jonathan suffered 36 stab wounds, mostly in his neck and upper shoulder area. Some of these wounds appeared to be hesitation wounds, but at least one struck an artery. But all of the wounds appeared to be from a pen knife, or what I would call a pocket knife.
Oh, wow.
Not what I would use to kill somebody.
No.
Now, hesitation wounds, we probably are all aware of this, but in case you're not, they're superficial cuts or stabs and are considered reliable evidence of suicidal intent. So it's a situation where someone is working up the nerve to stab or cut themselves. So they're not going to be as deep as a stab wound would be, say, if it was caused by somebody other than themselves.
Right.
None of these 36 wounds, including the one that hit his artery, were the cause of Jonathan's death.
Oh.
His official cause of death was drowning.
No.
He was alive when he went into the creek.
No.
Now, we know he would have died within minutes of that wound to the artery, but he drowned before that could happen. That is weird to me. So he gets stabbed, hits the artery, he's going to die in minutes, but instead he ends up in the creek and drowns.
And the fact that there was already blood, so you would think he was already injured an hour before when he was at the toll booth. That to me is strange. So all those stab wounds didn't happen at the same time then? Is that the idea?
It appears not. Now, one of the theories is that somebody did this to him and they just tortured him along, like the night was just spent being tortured with just 36 little stab wounds from a pocket knife. And that explains the hesitation wounds because they weren't really meant to kill. They were just meant to hurt.
Oh, so instead of being hesitation, they were just to inflict torture.
Right.
Oh.
But it is weird because there is blood on the ticket. And then there's a little bit of blood inside the front seat. There's a lot of blood in the back seat of the car. Remember, a big pool of blood. And then there's smear marks on the outside of the car.
What if the assailant thought Jonathan to be dead and put him in the back seat and he was bleeding out? That's the large pool. But then when he went to dump him, realized he wasn't and stabbed him more times before putting him in the creek.
I mean, I think that's possible. I don't think we can rule it out.
Yeah.
Investigators began digging into Jonathan's work and personal life. And when they did, they found some aspects that they found interesting.
Uh-oh.
So for starters, it appeared that Jonathan had some previous beef with his boss, Maryland U.S. Attorney Thomas DiBaggio. And Jonathan's job may have been in jeopardy, although later on, Thomas DiBaggio would deny this. Jonathan had filed an equal opportunity complaint against DiBaggio, alleging he had experienced discrimination. And he wasn't the only one to do so. Now, I'm not sure if it's related to that or not, but there was also a time when DiBaggio forced Jonathan to leave the Department of Justice building in Baltimore and literally locked him out of the building.
Oh boy. Okay, so this is big time.
Right. Now later it was learned that DiBaggio was doing this and he didn't go through the proper protocol, and Jonathan ended up being allowed back into the building. But to say there was beef is probably an understatement.
Yeah.
Jonathan also had a secret credit card where he'd accumulated $25,000 in debt that he'd hidden from his wife. And there was also an internet search history from 6 years prior where someone going by the name of Jonathan Luna was on a website looking for sex. Now, some people say, well, that wouldn't have been Jonathan. He's a smart guy. He's not going to use his real name, because I don't know that it was actually on one of their computers. I'm not sure. That's really all the information I was able to get.
Okay.
But apparently there's a Jonathan Luna account looking for sex 6 years prior. He was married at the time. It didn't appear they had an open relationship.
Okay.
Whether it was actually him or not, I don't know that we can say.
Okay.
Investigators also learned that about a year before his death, in 2002, Jonathan had prosecuted a case where someone had robbed a bank. Jonathan won this case, but at the end of the trial, $36,000 went missing from evidence, and soon after, Jonathan mysteriously came into $10,000. Now, Jonathan was scheduled to take a polygraph regarding the missing money just 2 days after he died. And he'd rescheduled this polygraph. He'd previously postponed it.
Oh, okay.
Now, while this could look incriminating, and I agree it doesn't look good, right? The FBI are the ones who actually had physical custody of the $36,000. So there is question as to whether Jonathan would have even had access to it. And Jonathan wasn't the only person involved in the case who was asked to take a polygraph. In fact, almost everyone involved in the bank robbery case was asked to take one.
Okay. But also, where did he get 10 grand?
I don't know.
You know what I'm saying? That's a lot of money. So if he didn't get it from this, got it from somewhere.
Investigators also processed the physical evidence that they found at the scene, and they did find DNA and partial fingerprints from an unknown person in Jonathan's car. Both were tested, but came back with no matches. At some point in the investigation, authorities start to question if maybe this wasn't a homicide. What if this was a suicide? Now, right off the bat, I go, huh? I do have some problems with this.
You're going to have to spell this out for me.
Okay, I will. But I will tell you, I don't know that I have personally completely ruled this possibility out in my mind. So let me start
again,
there.
If the circumstances under which he was found were slightly different, I would say, yeah, I mean, there certainly would be motive, as far as you're laying it out. But yeah, the way he was found, you're going to have to, I need a blow by blow here.
Okay. Well, let's start with the things that possibly support this theory. So Jonathan did seem to be under a lot of stress.
Yep.
He was worried about losing his job.
Yep.
He was worried about being publicly humiliated.
Yep.
He may have been worried about his marriage if there had been infidelity, either sexual or financial, and it appears there may have been both. Also, if this was a murder, to me, the use of a pocket knife points to it not being premeditated, especially because it was Jonathan's own pocket knife.
Huh. I mean, is this literally death by 1,000 cuts? I mean, is that what this is?
It feels like it. But I do think if you were planning on murdering someone or kidnapping them or forcing them to go somewhere and do something against their will, you would bring some kind of a weapon and not just hope they just happen to have a teeny tiny pocket knife on them that you could literally just,
torture them with.
But again, at the same time, there's a lot about this case that makes the idea of suicide seem improbable. First, his friends and family said he'd never expressed feelings of wanting to harm himself.
Yeah, but it sounds like there are also things about his life that they were not aware of.
True. We can't argue that. A big problem with me with the suicide theory is the fact that the weapon was not found at the scene when it was processed. So if Jonathan had done this to himself, you would think you would find that weapon when you find his body.
In his hand, under his body,
in the car, somewhere very near. Well, the weapon was eventually found, and it was found in the location where Jonathan's body had been. However, the stream had previously been searched. It was only found 2.5 months after his death during a sweep of the crime scene. And it was found in the stream near the rock where Jonathan's body had been discovered. Now, this is not a big, when I say creek, the one picture I saw was like minnows. Minnows
Okay.
might be swimming around. We're
Okay.
not talking a river. We're
Okay.
not talking powerful rushes of water. There may have been areas, I don't know if it opened up, but it's a little creek. So is it possible they missed the knife in a creek with everything else going on? I don't think it's impossible that they just missed it, but it is strange.
Well, especially because it is just a pocket knife. You know what I mean? It's not like they're looking for a machete or something. It is a pocket knife. So could that have been missed? Yeah, maybe.
I think it could have been, but it seems strange because
Yeah.
obviously here's the other thing. If it really was found where his body was found 2.5 months later, then it should have been pretty easily found originally, because that means it didn't get buried, it didn't go down the stream, it didn't get,
Yeah, but the idea is that somebody came back to the creek after the fact and threw it where his body was. Like, that seems almost more improbable.
that's been proposed.
That seems to me that seems to make less sense than the fact that they just missed it the first time.
Would it change your mind if you knew that the ones who are leaking the information about Jonathan's affair and his work issues and just all of the stuff that kind of makes him look bad, if that was coming from anonymous federal officials? And federal officials also went to the new county coroner and asked him to change the manner of death ruling from homicide to suicide.
Huh. Well, that part definitely gets my attention.
So does it sound like a leap that maybe it would have been planted? It does. But if they really want this to look like a suicide and they've got a missing weapon.
They've got to tie it up. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, in regards to the weapon, remember, Jonathan was found still wearing his business suit and overcoat. So if you are going to stab yourself, wouldn't you remove those bulky clothes, especially when you're using just a tiny little knife?
Yeah.
Again, it's not like he's using a machete that's going to easily go through those clothes.
Yeah, I don't know. The suicide thing is still not working for me.
On March 12th, 2004, investigators held a press conference announcing 3 possible theories: that he was killed by a stranger, killed by someone he knew, or that he killed himself.
Oh, those seem like likely theories. Yes.
The only one we're leaving out is an accident.
I was like, wow, they really ruled a lot of things out there.
Well, I know it sounds silly to think that this could have been an accident, but that was actually one of the theories that ended up popping up.
He accidentally fell on his knife 36 times.
Well, not exactly. But what if he knew he was in a lot of trouble? He knew he'd upset this judge. He knew that he was about to be made a fool out of. He had all these stressors that we've already discussed. What if he staged this to gain sympathy? And he did cause these wounds himself, which would explain the hesitation wounds. And he accidentally nicked an artery and then got delirious. I assume whatever happened to him at least started in the vehicle, because that's where the majority of the blood was. He gets out of the vehicle, which explains the smear on the door and the front fender, and stumbles over as he's losing blood after accidentally hitting his artery and lands face down in the creek and drowns.
I don't think you would do it 36 times, though. After you stab yourself, I don't know, 10 times, which already seems pretty excessive to me. You going to keep going just to try to get sympathy?
That's a good point, because I cannot imagine doing that to myself, especially without the intent of actually wanting to harm myself.
If you had said he was stabbed 2 or 3 times, all right, maybe. But 36? No, he wasn't trying to stage anything.
Right.
I just don't see the accident theory making sense.
Okay. You raise a really good point.
I mean, that's a lot of times. And again, every time you're stabbing yourself, you're taking a risk of hitting something kind of important.
Right.
So the fact that you made it through 35 without hitting your artery is pretty impressive.
Right.
But I just don't see the need to stab yourself that many times.
I think that's a great point. Investigators also announced that the FBI was offering a $100,000 reward for information, and they were specifically looking for details about what was happening for the unaccounted moments during that car ride, which I would love to know.
Absolutely.
5 years after Jonathan's death, the FBI released a statement that he had been alone from the time he left his office until his body was found the next morning.
Well, of course they're going to say that if they want the suicide theory to make sense.
And regarding that suicide theory that they're hoping for, The coroner refused to change the findings, and he stands by the original findings.
Okay.
So somebody's on the up and up. Love that.
Yeah.
State Representative Mark Cohen wrote to the Justice Department asking for independent investigation, but the request for an independent investigation was denied. The FBI has kept Jonathan's case open, and some people presume that's so that the files are never released.
Well, we just covered a case, Paula, that I think is in the same situation, because in order for there to be a review, the investigating agency has to officially close the case. And hers is still open, yet there's nothing really being done with it.
Well, and in that case, they've literally said, we think she either killed herself or died in the woods.
Yeah,
so
but
why
they're not
would you
willing,
keep that open?
But they're not willing. Yeah, because they said they can't figure out either one.
Right.
But I think that's just a way to get around having scrutiny from another agency.
I'm with you. Yeah. And in 2021, a court ruled that the autopsy records for Jonathan Luna's case will remain sealed.
Well, I think it's difficult in this situation because as citizens, we want to believe that our judicial system is without flaw, which we know there's no way it could be because we are human.
Right.
But I think anything that provides doubt about a person of authority, about their integrity, it makes us all uncomfortable.
I truly believe, and maybe I just have a romantic idea of, I don't know, the world, but I do believe that most of the time people are good and most of the time people are doing the right thing. And even in the case of like Warren Grace, the FBI and the prosecution probably thought they were doing something for the greater good, getting two really bad guys off of the streets. But when you start towing the line of what's moral and what's not, it can get really icky really fast. And then you find good people doing bad things.
It's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
And they started out with good intentions and good motives. But then their own desire to close a case or catch the bad guy means they're willing to cut corners or, like you said, look in some more shady places to accomplish that, which is just not the way to go.
It's not. So that's the story. That's the story of Jonathan Luna.
I feel bad for his wife and kids. That stinks. Either way, if he was murdered or if he committed suicide, either one, it just, especially because it sounds like some of his comrades have come out saying he wasn't making the best choices. And that's just not the way anybody wants to go out, I don't think.
Right.
So that's tough.
It's a sad, tragic scenario. Angela's never come out and spoken about her husband's death. And I can only assume that she's picked up the pieces and raising those children and finding peace, moving on. But yeah, a real tragedy.
Absolutely.
Well, let's bring it up by talking about our branch of hope.
Let's do it. We have a really good one, a great organization, and some Star Wars trivia.
I know. And you know what? I think I'm going to have to go back and give the whole Star Wars trilogy another try. Because, again, just like Harry Potter, I must be missing it. I must be missing something. I mean, they're so loved worldwide, and I just haven't gotten on the bandwagon. It's got to be me.
I will say watching it with my kids was fun. I liked that part, watching it with my kids.
Now, see, I recently tried watching whatever the first one that ever came out was. I know they are all out of order.
Mm-hmm.
So whichever one was the first one released with my 8-year-old, and he was kind of into it, but the 5-year-old could have cared less. They're not an easy watch.
No, they're not an easy watch. And I will say it wasn't until just this year,
Mm-hmm.
so mine are 8 and 10,
Right.
that they were able to sit through it.
Right.
But they really liked it after that.
Yeah.
And I just like watching them
Of
experience
course.
all these new things.
Of course. I'll have to give it another go. But on that note, our February 2025 Branch of Hope recipient is the Peter Mayhew Foundation. And if you don't recognize that name, Peter Mayhew was the actor who portrayed Chewbacca in the trilogy, the original trilogy, but he went on to play that role until 2015. The Peter Mayhew Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization devoted to the alleviation of disease, pain, suffering, and the financial toll brought on by life's traumatic events. By providing its available resources directly to deserving children and adults in need, they assist numerous charitable organizations in order to promote and boost their effectiveness and provide support where needed. And we talked about the Peter Mayhew Foundation and some of the wonderful things they did in our case on Liz Barraza, because she worked with them and was involved in charity work as well. And they did some things for her after her death. So a really, really great foundation. And you can go directly to their website and read all kinds of really beautiful stories of people they've helped. And it's really encouraging. If you need to pick me up, head over there. You'll get the good feels.
It is. It really, it's a sweet story.
Yes.
I feel like that should be our theme. We're totally stealing it from Mr. Rogers, but we're finding the helpers.
I love it.
Yeah. And that helps us.
It does.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us, Shiver Seekers. Make sure to join us next week, where I'm going to be covering the case of Logan Schindelman. He was a 19-year-old former high school football star who disappeared in Washington under very strange circumstances. So we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of where Logan might be. So come back for that story next week.
Thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks, Shiver Seekers.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.